And now I have the great honor of inviting Dr. Martin Entz to the stage. So Martin is a professor. Many of you know Martin. He's been researching organic production at Glenlee for over 30 years. PhD at the University of Manitoba. He has a PhD in crop physiology from the University of Saskatchewan in 1988 and worked as a farm manager and research agronomist before embarking on his academic career. He and his research team have worked on organic agricultural systems for over 30 years, and in November 2023, Martin was appointed as the inaugural Jurlwalski Chair in Natural Systems Agriculture for Climate Solutions. So please help me in welcoming Dr. Martin Entz.
Thanks, Marla. Thank you, Marla. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I think this will all work. So, the slides are up there, and I selected this title because I wanted to honor the work that you do and to acknowledge that it's really important and it's making a difference in the world. Now, you all come from different places. You're involved in organic agriculture in different ways, but in very hopeful ways. And hope is always important, as we just heard from the elder who spoke to us. So when I think about hope, I remember this tragedy that happened when I was in university, the Ethiopian famine. And it was devastating. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. And there were a lot of responses. There was Live Aid, Bob Geldof, some of you may remember that. But there was also this group of American artists who came together and created this song called We Are the World. And if we had time, we would all sing it together. But we'll save that for after the banquet when when you're more relaxed. But what I thought was interesting about this group is that they didn't just have a bunch of individual artists perform, as interesting as Live Aid was, but they took their skills and they did it together in community. And they created a synergy from that. And when I think about this, I think about you. And that's why I selected the title that We Are the World and You Are the World. They took their care and their creativity and they were innovative. And just walking through the trade show this morning, you see a lot of that innovation. So congratulations. The challenges don't end. They're increasing, in fact. And I wanted to show you this diagram, which is a little complicated, but it outlines for us many of the challenges of the biophysical world. So this planetary boundary concept is like this. It's got the green circle in the middle, and that is the safe operating zone for the planet. So if we are managing biodiversity on the planet in a way that it's within the green line, then we're okay. But it's not. You can see the biodiversity. Let's see if I have a pointer. It's up here. And it's way past what we would consider the safe zone for planetary survival. And biodiversity is like rivets on an airplane wing. You can lose a whole bunch and the wing still works, but then you reach a tipping point. So we actually have, this summer, we've got a summer student to paint the planetary boundaries on a big piece of plywood, and we put it up at our research site, and we've had a lot of really interesting conversations about it. And so I wanted to start with this to illustrate that we have a lot of challenges. We often think in Canada that it can't happen here. We have this amazing country, as Elder Linkletter just told us. Thank you for that. It is an amazing country, and there's so many resources. This is like Disneyland for many people compared to so many other countries of the world. But we've had our problems, and the cod collapse of the 1990s. How many of you remember that? Put up your hands. Okay, so you remember that. And if somebody in your table doesn't, you can explain that to them. Yeah, here was an industry which we thought was going to go on forever. It was, hundreds and hundreds of years people were collecting cod from the North Atlantic, and all of a sudden they collapsed. So it can happen here. How did we get here? How did things like the cod collapse happen? Well, as magical as fossil fuels are, and we do rely on them, they have had a negative side effect, and that is they have allowed us to uncouple our agriculture from natural processes. And so we have these simplified farming systems which are not that resilient in the face of stress. But when you talk about, doing things differently that might not be quite as economically efficient, I'm going against, 300 years of economic theory. That's Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, and his argument was that people will just leave them alone and they'll always do the most rational economic thing, called the invisible hand. Many of you will have heard about that. And it has served us well, except that it has not considered externalities. And that's what these red lines over the planetary safe space really represent. Is there hope? Yes. And one of these zones, this one here, it's stratospheric ozone depletion. That used to be in the red zone, and now it's back into the safe zone. And that's because the Montreal Protocol was a treaty signed by most nations, and we stopped the production of CFCs, which were killing the ozone holes. So there is hope. And I think organic agriculture is also one of those things that gives us hope. It's been around. IFOAM, which is the international organization, has been around for 50 years. And I want to make a point in that the We Are the World rock stars, what they did was wonderful, but they were too late because the Ethiopian famine was pretty well over in 1986 when they released their song. But that's not true with you because you've been at this for 50 years. So congratulations. The problem, you're supposed to chuckle when you see this slide. I worked hard to make it humorous. Maybe I need to explain it to you. But when we have conversations about fixing the planet, people don't often listen to the organic sector. So I liken it to the organic agriculture is like at the kids' table. How many of you remember the kids' table? Okay, you remember the kids, so you get it, right? And the adults know better. And I got so frustrated at this that I wrote an essay saying organic agriculture deserves a seat at the grown-ups table, and you can watch the seminar that we held about this. Okay, so that's my introduction. Just positioning organic agriculture as something that's part of a global movement to make the planet a more livable place. So here's a real grown-up question. How are we going to feed 10 billion people within those planetary boundaries? And a number of scholars people have been thinking about this for a long time. There's been a lot written about it. We are analyzing how much the global population is growing. We know that global population growth is declining dramatically. And we know where in the world the world's population is going to increase, where it's going to decrease. So what they did is they created this U-turn sort of model. And basically what they're saying is that we're at the status quo here, and we need to dial down some of these threats to bring these activities, things like biodiversity loss and freshwater use and nitrogen flows back into a safe zone. Nitrogen flows is a major problem. We're putting so much reactive nitrogen into the atmosphere, into the soil, that it's causing all kinds of problems, not just nitrous oxides, but polluting water and also producing particulate matter, which drives respiratory diseases. And then we also have to dial up sustainability. I actually called this Build Back Better, but Sasha told me, he's over there, he said, don't use that term. So I called it dialing up sustainability. So that's really the global challenge. So if we were sitting at the United Nations right now, this is the conversation that we would be having, is how do we do this? And what I'm arguing for is that I think the organic sector has something to offer to achieve this U-turn. So let's just start with biodiversity. That's where we have the biggest problem on the planet. We're losing too many of the creatures, the big creatures, the microscopic creatures. We know that organic farms have higher levels of biodiversity. Maybe not every organic farm, maybe there's some that are managed in a particular way that's not happening, but study after study is showing that on balance, organic farms have higher levels of biodiversity. So one of the questions that researchers are asking is, how do we best deploy organic farming to get the biggest bang for our biodiversity buck? And this work, just citing a paper here from Sweden, where Henrik Smith has looked at this question, and what they found is that, don't shine the pointer there, Martin, that doesn't work, I have to point it up here. And they found that the benefit of organic farming was actually greatest in a landscape where there was very little nature. So that's useful, that's interesting, because the birds, for example, that's what they were studying, have a place to eat some weed seeds, and then they can spill over into the rest of the landscape. So that's just, for me, a very interesting practical solution. Where do we deploy our organic acres? Because what percentage of the world's land base is going to be managed organically? Right now, it's 2.5%. Maybe it'll be 5%, maybe 8%, maybe 10%, but it may be our best hope to bring biodiversity back onto the landscape. Another question people have asked is, if we put biodiversity on an organic farm, should we have blocks of trees like we see over here on landscape B, or should we go with small fields and hedgerows, so the same area is in hedgerows? And the answer is that these smaller fields really pay off. And on the bottom here, I've got a picture of Villicus Farms, the crabtree farm in Montana, where some of their fields, they have these perennial grass strips, and that would be a source of biodiversity. And on the other side, I have a picture that Ryan Boyd took of New Zealand, which has kind of the same scenario. So we're learning something about how to deploy biodiversity. But somebody in the audience would say, well, look, organic agriculture yields less, so you need more land for farming, and so you have less natural area. And that's a very logical argument. Let's unpack that a little bit. Yes, organic agriculture may need some more land. There is a little bit of a but there. And I'm not going to explain this figure. I just wanted to have you believe that I'm actually, using some facts to make my next point. Is what was observed in a number of studies is the natural area next to the farm was much healthier when that farm was an organic farm versus when that farm was a conventional farm. And when I drive up to my little farm, I see the trees next to one of the neighbors' soybean fields, and the glyphosate has drifted into the forest. You can see that every now and again when they spray when it's windy. So that's an illustration. And the other point that we need to think about is, yes, organic agriculture may produce a little less food, so that just motivates us to waste less food, because in Canada we're wasting 30 to 40% of the food that we produce. Okay, we're still talking about dialing down that threat. The other threat is climate change. But it's not really climate change. I think it's more truthful to call it rapid climate change, because we've had climate change before, but not this fast. This is uncharted territory, whether you want to believe it or not. And it's already starting to bite yields. Australian wheat yields have really stalled because of elevated temperatures. This work is done by Zvi Hochman, who's the first author. I know Zvi. He's an extremely good scientist. But we're getting pressure not just because agriculture is suffering. I think we're going to get pressure to reduce our greenhouse gases from other places, like the insurance industry. According to this Globe and Mail article, in Ontario, people are paying 64% more for their home insurance now than they were 13 years ago. And that's because of erratic weather. In Australia, 1 in 25 homes by 2030 will not be insurable. Well, once people start not being able to buy insurance or paying more for it, they're going to put pressure on their politicians. And that's going to make the politicians look for places where those greenhouse gases are coming from. Organic agriculture can fight greenhouse gases in a number of ways. What greenhouse gases are we talking about? Well, there's carbon dioxide, which is the big one in blue. There's methane, which is in orange, and nitrous oxide, which is in yellow. Nitrous oxide is the real problem for agriculture, because most of the nitrous oxide that's released in Canada comes from agriculture. I think carbon, we've got a pretty good handle on carbon. So what do we know? Well, now I'm just going to refer to a little bit of our research from our long-term study at Glenlee. Here's a grad student who measured, Megan Westfall, and she measured a very hopeful result. Our organic systems produced about 30% less nitrous oxide per bushel of wheat compared to conventional wheat. So that's very good. And I'm going to show you some data here because you might not be so familiar with what happens in conventional agriculture, or I actually call it chemical agriculture, which is what it is. This is from 2024. This is just hot off the press data. So Julia Beechner was an RBC student with us, and she looked at the nitrous oxide from the time we planted the oats. This is in oats. And she looked at it for 10 sampling dates till the middle of June. And so on June 9th, we planted the oats, all the oats, and then we put 80 kilograms per hectare of urea fertilizer. It was coated to reduce the nitrous oxide loss onto the conventional oats. And these blue lines here that go up and down, that's the precipitation that happened. And we had a little bit of rain here, and then we had a pretty big rain, well, an inch, 25 millimeters, and then we had a big plume of nitrous oxide from the conventional oats. That's typical of what you get in a fertilized system. It gets wet, and the soil burps, right? Now the organic systems, there was no, and then there's a little bit of a burp here from the chemical system. The organic systems were flat. They were not releasing nitrous oxide. That's not to say organic systems can't release nitrous oxide. They can. But in this case, there wasn't any. Now the picture on the top is the oats in the organic rotation where we did not have a really good legume history. And you can see those oats are nitrogen deficient. And so many people will tell you that the reason your organic system is not releasing nitrous oxide is there's no nitrogen. Well, yes, that one, the nitrogen in the soil was only 25 kgs per hectare at seeding compared to 66 in the chemical agriculture. But we did have a plot in there showing at the bottom, that's organic oats, where we did have an alfalfa history, and that had quite a bit more nitrogen in it, and that also did not blow off any nitrous oxide. And the yield was pretty good. It was about 92% of the conventional yield. So this is kind of what happens with nitrous oxide. When you get a lot of nitrogen, you get wet conditions, you tend to lose the nitrous oxide. Why is organic agriculture releasing less? I don't know if we have all the answers to that, but certainly one of the reasons is you have a more busy soil biological activity, which is eating up that nitrogen before it has a chance to be lost. That's a very unscientific way to describe it. Okay, we also, Sarah Wilcott works with me, and she's supported by the Western Grains Research Foundation, and she modeled 12 years of data at Glenlee looking at carbon and looking at nitrous oxide. So this is carbon here. And I don't want to go into this in a lot of detail, but basically that purple line here, that's our high-performing organic system. It does a good job of bringing carbon into the soil. And it's nitrous oxide emissions, which are shown here. They're just below the conventional grain-only system. So a pretty good greenhouse gas story for organic agriculture here. And then one of the things that we do know, though, is when we green manure the land and we add that rich nitrogen into the soil, and then we till it, and then we get a rain, that's when we can produce a lot of nitrous oxides in organic agriculture. And what we've been looking at here is what happens when we reduce the tillage by using a blade roller instead of a disc to reduce the nitrous oxide, and the research basically shows that we reduce the nitrous oxide emissions. So there's some management things that we can do, and I think I'll leave it there for now. So any questions, by the way? Anybody want to ask a question? Shout out a question? How are you doing? Like, when I'm standing up here and you're all dark and you're looking at me like, when is this going to become fun? And, okay, well, you're alive. That's good. All right. So we've talked about dialing down the threat and the role that organic agriculture can play in there. And I would say that organic agriculture, just by its very nature, already creates less of a threat. Now we want to talk about build back better. Increase the sustainability. Okay, what happened yesterday, by the way? Everybody's so nervous. Like, I know the Jets won. Did anybody else win? Okay. Anyways, so the the steps that have been suggested, which allow us to have a diet of 2,800 calories per person for 10.2 billion people on the planet. That's kind of the list that people have come up with. And I want to end off talking about human health, because that's an important one. At the bottom is nitrogen. And as I mentioned earlier, nitrogen is a hugely important element, because 78% of the atmosphere that we're breathing here is nitrogen. We bring it into the fertilizer. I notice this is a nutrient building, so there'll probably be a lightning bolt here shortly. But we bring it into urea. But biologically, we also do that with legumes, right? How do we reduce the problem of nitrogen in the ecosystem globally? So Chloe McLaren, Swedish Agricultural University, together with a bunch of Europeans, modeled this system where they recognized that most of the nitrogen fertilizer is used in the global north, where we overuse it, and too little is used in the global south. And can we balance that out? And their research shows that if we go from this to this, we can provide global food security and actually use less total nitrogen. Well, your chemical farming neighbors are not going to like this, because how are they going to get enough nitrogen to grow their crops? They're going to learn that from you, because you are the legume cover crop experts. Yeah, you are. Where did, the knowledge for growing cover crops come from in Canada? Now, there's government policies that pay farmers to buy seed for cover crops. It came from the organic sector. And there's all kinds of opportunity to backfill some of that nitrogen with legumes. And so in this way, you very much are the world. Thank you. This list, this Build Back Better list, we could spend days talking about that. I'm just going to highlight a few things that I thought might be important. The other one is sort of farm diversity. By creating diversity on the farm, we stabilize our yield and we create opportunities. It's really important. This diagram here describes a 5-dimensional diversity. And if you look it up online, you might get this diagram. I hope maybe this lecture is being recorded and you can watch it later. 5-dimensional diversity. That means diversity within the field, diversity around the field, diversity in the landscape in the area, and maybe diversity of species, not just crops, but also livestock. And this can be employed at a local level on the farm or maybe at a regional level. Whoop. Okay, I'm just going to skip through that one. So how do we introduce that diversity on the farm? One of the ways is intercropping. And intercropping is not for everybody, and it's not for every situation. But if we look around the world, as these researchers did here, they looked at data from all these black points around the world, and they came up with this figure to describe how much over-yielding or how much additional yield happens from intercropping with things like a wheat-pea intercrop, a cowpea sorghum intercrop, a potato-corn intercrop, a cotton-wheat intercrop. Intercropping is known to increase yield potential on average. Some years it doesn't, but on average. And the pictures on the left show different types of intercrops that organic farmers have used. How many of you like intercropping? How many of you don't like it? I like it and I don't like it. I've done both. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not great. Where did the knowledge of intercropping come from? From you. Organic farmers were really the first ones. Other than those few people doing canola peas back in the 80s, the organic farmers really have pioneered this area. Now, why does intercropping work and who cares and how can we make it better? So I'm going to give another little science lesson. Here we have a flax sorghum intercrop. On the left, we have flax growing by itself. And in this experiment, which is published here, they have sorghum growing by itself. And then they mix the two. That flax plant here growing in the intercrop is bigger than this flax plant. In fact, it's 46% larger. The sorghum plant growing in the intercrop is only 7% smaller than over here. Okay? So that's why the math doesn't add up, and this intercrop has higher yield potential. Does that make sense? Put up your hand if you're with me. Okay. All right. Put up your hand if you're sleeping. You're sleeping. Okay, keep sleeping. Sleep is good. And so you get it, right? The sorghum is a plant that produces a lot of sugars, and flax is a plant that everybody who's grown flax knows, like nothing. It starts very slowly, and by intercropping, it's getting some of its carbon from the sorghum, and it doesn't have to do it all through photosynthesis. Now, how does the carbon get from the sorghum to the flax? Through the common mycorrhizal network, through this fungal network which connects these two plants. So then we ask ourselves, okay, now we're interested in what happens below ground. What's happening with these mycorrhiza? And what are these things anyways? Well, we've done quite a bit of work with mycorrhiza. So Kathy Welch, a grad student, actually washed out the spores of mycorrhizal, the spores of the fungus from our long-term study. That's the conventional, that's the organic. You can see the organic 100 grams of soil has more spores and they're more diverse. And what happens is the spores live in the soil, and then the plant grows toward them, and when the plant reaches them, the spores germinate because they get energy from the plant, and then they grow their network, connecting different plants. Make sense? Okay. And then recently, Letitia Makungu is a grad student who just finished her work, and she looked at the mycorrhiza infection, which is a good term, of the flax in our organic systems versus our conventional. And you can see the organic systems have, the flax is more connected to other plants through the mycorrhiza. So this tells me that at least in this instance, the soil in the organic managed land is better able to have a healthy mycorrhizal population, which might mean it is better able to create a high-yielding intercrop. But there's other ways of introducing diversity onto the farm. Strip cropping. This is an organic farm in Quebec, about 1,500 acres. We've had the privilege of working with this farm for quite a few years, and they took a 200-acre field and they put strips of their rotation is corn, soybean, and winter wheat. I know it's a bit different than the crops you grow here. And their motivation for that is they had aphids in their soybeans. And you know, the problem with legumes is insects love them. They're just so nutrient rich. And what happened is when, I'm not going to show you the data, but when they grew the soybeans in strips, the aphid population never got out of control because the ladybugs could move from the winter wheat to the aphids very easily. So this is just another form of creating diversity, which the term I like is called a pest suppressive agroecosystem. And those pest suppressive tactics can also be used in animal agriculture. And we've got some really nice animal agriculture examples in the trade show. You go visit them. People can use parasitoids in dairy barns. They can use push-pull systems in dairy barns. And most of our work is in crops and soils, but I just wanted to mention this opportunity. Okay, let's talk about water management. I've talked to some farmers here who, you know, they haven't had a lot of rain for a long time. Other farmers in other parts of the prairies have had a lot of rain. And with climate change, what are they predicting? I guess we'll find out tomorrow. I think there's a speaker. But lots of longer dry periods and periods of excess water. So we need to conserve water in dry land, but I want to talk about excess water. Because that also does happen, and this can really hurt an organic operation because your chemical neighbor can get an airplane and spray their weeds, but if the soil is sopping wet, you can't get in there and till your land. And I wanted to give a demonstration of what one farm family has done in Manitoba, and they're right at the eastern edge of the Canadian prairies. They're very, very wet, and excess water is a chronic problem for them. And so they took this 300-acre field, surface drained it, so all the water runs into this one wetland, and they can do that in their landscape. And so then that sump is what you were looking at, and then they pump that water into a much larger reservoir where they can hold that water and eventually use it to irrigate again, or they can release it into the drainage system. That make sense? You know, the price of this is probably less than a reasonable sized, you know, medium-sized tractor. But this kind of water management is interesting to me because it's out-of-the-box thinking. And we see more and more of this in Manitoba, especially in the potato industry, where people are using these types of approaches to capture water. And so I just wanted to talk about that innovation. We're back to talking about intercrops because intercrops in certain cases can also help you with water management, especially if you have subsoil water. On the right here is a diagram of corn and pigeon pea in Africa, and these pigeon peas are semi-perennial legumes. They will bring water up from deep in the profile, and they'll deliver it to the corn, and they'll deliver it to the soil microbes. So it's called hydraulic lifting, and it's a real phenomenon. And on the left-hand side, you'll see a brassica field that's benefiting from a cover crop that's hydraulically lifting water versus on the other side where it's not. So, interesting ways of thinking about water. Okay, a couple of more examples. And how are we doing? We still hanging in there? Okay. Yeah, I know I have to be done at a certain time. So your chemical neighbors, they're pooping their pants because of glyphosate-resistant kochia. They had no hand in creating the problem, of course, but you're really not, because whether you're not using herbicides. Maybe someday there'll be an organic herbicide, but right now not. I think what is why is there kochia around that area here? Anybody tell me? Salt. Right, it's salt, and you understand that kochia is mostly a salt problem, and salt is a water problem. So how do you deal with that? Perennial plants are an excellent way of lowering the water table, dealing with this, and there are a lot of salinity-tolerant grasses, and then we can integrate livestock. And this is just so interesting to me, because if you go around to the farm meetings and listen to people talk about herbicide-resistant kochia, phone me when the agronomist tells you could do this. Phone me and I'll send you a hat. I'll send you a hat, a Bucktril M hat. I still got a few in the shop. Okay. When we talk, that shows your age. So the other innovation that we see is in machinery. And this is, again, that Quebec farm, and they're doing something that may not apply to you because they're growing crops that are different than you. But let me explain. They grow, after their winter wheat, they seed peas. It's a pea cover crop, okay? And then they ridge their field, and so the peas are growing on the right-hand side. The peas are growing on these ridges. The next spring, they come along, and they knock the tops off those ridges with this shovel, and they plant their corn. And then they reform the ridges, and then they do the same thing with soybean, and then they're back to winter wheat. These machines... This system was designed by the farmers. That's not the only equipment they've designed. They built this cultivator. You'll notice it has no springs. It's solid shanks. And they built it so they could kill their red clover in one pass. So it would stay in the ground. And, of course, you can't do this with big rocks. But, they did that. They built a precision manure spreader so they could put the rates of manure on that they wanted to. They built a thing for putting cover crops between corn, and that's interesting because I think organic corn is a crop that's been kind of ignored on the prairies, certain parts of the prairies. And then they built this weed whacker, which goes between the rows of soybeans, and just like a little, DeWalt whacker. And here, right in the trade show, we've got somebody who's building a rod weeder. You can now buy a new rod weeder. That's really, give that person a hand. That's awesome. Yeah. And I'm making him feel good because I'm looking for a 15% discount on that rod weeder. So hopefully that helped, or maybe even more. But, when back in the old days, when I started with organic agriculture, you'd use these old rod weeders, which hopefully sometimes still work. Now you can buy new. Equipment innovation is really important, and it's really helped no-till, and I think it's going to really help organic in the future. The other place where we're innovating, and people are saying if we're going to build back better, we need to rethink crop nutrition. We need to rethink we need to create a nutrient cycle, and not just buy the fertilizer, use it on the farm, sell the grain, and then people will eliminate those nutrients in a city and it'll become a pollutant. We need to close that cycle. Well, organic farmers are already 2 to 3 times more efficient in using manure than their conventional neighbors. We know that. But now there's new sources of nutrients. Anaerobic digestate from, for example, Lethbridge Biogas. Since 2013, they've been anaerobic digesting waste, and then that leftover stuff is a phosphorus-rich fertilizer. Frass from insect operations. These are already registered for organic, and now you're going to have a discussion after this about struvite. I want to talk about human health because this is one of the reasons people supported the organic sector to begin with. They said, we want something with fewer chemicals. And in the spirit of only really talking about data that's peer-reviewed and published, which is what I try to do, I just want to alert you to some of the scientists who've done most of the work. This is Carlo Leifert, University of Newcastle, and then moved to Australia. Done a lot of work on the health benefits or the consequences of organic food. Organic food tends to be higher in antioxidants, which is something that can suppress some cancers, lower in pesticides, and lower in heavy metals, especially cadmium, which chemical phosphorus fertilizer delivers to the soil. And then in 2006, there was this study, which I didn't really believe at the start. They took these kids and they fed them organic food for 5 days and then measured the malathion in their urine. And it had an immediate, can you hear that? Okay, effect, right? Since then, there's been better data. This is a study looking at glyphosate in the urine of pregnant women, just published in 2023, and they looked at, I think, 23 women, 39 women, and they fed them organic food. They fed them. They allowed them to eat organic food for a week, and the points in the red here means that the organic diet actually reduced the glyphosate in their urine. And this cohort of women probably represents most women in Canada. They were called the far field. They did not live next to the agricultural field. They lived further away. So we're a highly urbanized country, so maybe they lived in the city. And that's where the organic diet had its greatest effect on lowering urine glyphosate. And what I really liked about the journal that published this is they invited a critique. They said, okay, we've had this peer-reviewed, but we're going to actually want to have people, criticize this work, and it was critiqued and it was checked out. So the quality of the research in this field is really improving, and the results are really quite believable. The other thing, if we look at organic dairy products, they're higher in the good fatty acids. We know that. Grass-fed beef is better than, grain-finished beef. We've known that for decades. Now with milk, we notice the same thing. So the final thing about reaching the Build Back Better is the experts say that we need to change our diet. If we're going to feed everybody sustainably, only 25% of the protein that we consume should come from animal sources. Otherwise, we're just going to put too much pressure on the planet. So that means more pulses, more vegetables, more whole grains in the diet. Whole grains are good because they bring all those micronutrients from the bran and that type of thing into there. If we do this, organic becomes even more important because Mediterranean diets, which contain pulses, vegetables, whole grains, in surveys show that they have more pesticide in the food, especially insecticides. And so organic agriculture becomes even more important because it allows us to reduce that pesticide load. Final thing that these experts said in the U-turn, the Build Back Better, in this U-turn, is that global trade will play an important role in this global food security scenario, and it just so happens that Canada is one of the places that will continue to deliver food to many parts of the world. The places on the planet where the environmental damage from nitrogen fertilizer, overuse of water are serious are in Asia, especially Asia, and parts of Europe. Okay, I just got a few more minutes here. I just want to have some fun. I mean, I've had fun, but now I'm going to have a lot of fun. I like learning together. One of the things that is so enjoyable in my work is talking to students, to farmers, and being at conferences like this, we get to learn together. Second thing is, I'm going to show you a picture of my favorite farm. This is a farm in Nicaragua. I had the privilege of walking alongside these farmers for about 6 years together with different Central American universities. And on the top left is their organic tomato crop. On the bottom right is their top left is their chemical. Bottom right here is the organic tomatoes. These farmers used cover crops. They had 12 beef cattle on this 15-acre farm. They composted the manure using earthworms. They used natural insecticide from the neem tree, which is growing over to the right there. And they grow tomatoes, beans, and maize. Those are their main crops. Tomatoes for the market, other things for the market, also for themselves. And what was interesting is it didn't take too many crop cycles before those organic crops just started outperforming the conventional crops. So the notion that organic always has to yield less is not supported by this farm. The other thing I really like about this farm is, they worked hard to be successful. The younger generation, Ramon on the right there, he went to Costa Rica to learn organic methods. In a country where unemployment is 50%, having a successful farm gives them options. And if you're not successful, then maybe you have to raise your children in a slum, which really reduces their prospects. Okay, final point, and I'll come in on time. I want to tell you some of the places where I get my best sort of knowledge about organic agriculture. The first one is probably from the history of indigenous people in this part of the world. Indigenous communities farmed here for a long time. There's a plaque just north of Winnipeg at Lockport talking about how in 1400 corn was produced in that area. 1400, before Columbus stumbled upon the New World. So that's one place where I think there's a lot of knowledge to gain, and so I really appreciated the Elder Linkletter's words of encouragement. Within the Western science realm, this place here, the Rothamsted plots, which were established in 1843, they're the oldest crop rotations. This is the oldest crop rotation study in the world. It's really been a wonderful place to learn about what's working, what's not working. And I just wanted to share that because this is something I really enjoy. And I think it helps us understand the potential. These are the oldest plots in North America. They're the Morrow plots at the University of Illinois. They were started in 1876. They're still going today. And it's kind of cool. From I think that's 1908 to 1988, they look at the drop in soil carbon, and the farming system that drops the least has not only grains in it, but also pasture phases. So a good lesson there. And here's a great 1927 extension bulletin from the Morrow plots, and it says, fertilization does not replace rotation. That's great. This is another great old rotation. It's at Auburn University, started in 1896, still going today. And they focus on cover crops, like winter cover crops. And so a lot of really good sort of principles have come out of this study. 1911 is when we started our first long-term study in Canada, which is still going on, which is at the Lethbridge Research Station. And the oldest organic crop rotation study is in Switzerland, started in 1978, and it's called the DOC trial, and it's also still going on. And this trial really motivated me to start the Glenlee study, which is now done 33 years. And these long-term studies have, hey, I'll pass that along to all the technicians who've worked out there and said, you want me to do what? Thank you. Okay, so with that, I hope you're inspired to know that you are the world. Thank you very much. Let's make this U-turn together, and look forward to visiting with you today. Thanks.